Hello, this is Pixie Evil, and thank you guys for joining. So, I'm getting more used to doing this podcast thing because, this is kind of a new area for me, but I like it because I like to talk. I am, um, the last episode I left off with a little bit of details about my childhood and, the things that went through as a child. Um, I guess I should have put a little bit of a trigger warning on it because it may be something that um, some people have a hard time coping with or dealing with or talking about. And the one thing I want to encourage is for those of you who are a sexual abuse or sexual assault survivor, period, whether you are male or female, gay, straight, or whatever, I encourage you to tell your story and to scream it from the rooftop. It is the most freeing thing, and it's when I finally did it, it was like I took back the control. And while the people who were involved were upset that I did it, and the very reason they were upset is I took their control of the situation away from them by speaking up. Those of you who have reason to believe or suspect someone or your family member as being domestic in domestic abuse, sexual abuse, anything like that, I urge you not to overlook it and think, well, this is not my business. And if you have a family member who you know is sexually abusing other family members' children, or you or someone else, turn them in. Break the chain. It is unacceptable for you to cover it up. It doesn't matter if they're related to you or not, they are a monster. It is something that I live through daily. I have flashbacks. I do not, I'm not comfortable with my children being around men I don't know and like being in situations like that. It changed the course of my entire life and my mental health and well-being. And it is high time that we stop trying to sweep what's going on in our families under the rug and actually make people pay and take responsibility for how they're fucking up other people's lives. They shouldn't be allowed to be continuing doing it. When you cover it up, you are enabling an abuser to continue to abuse. Just because you don't see it or it's not happening to you doesn't mean that it's not happening. So please turn them in. Say something. Get that child out of the situation. Get that female out of the situation. Help them. So, scrolling through Facebook, I came across this article. This was an article in Parents Magazine on their Facebook page. You can actually find it. I'm going to read the title of it out. Um, like a month or two or so ago, I actually commented on it, and with what I was talking on my past podcast of some things that I went through in childhood, I want to bring this up because I want people to understand and realize why children do this and what it's a sign of, and it is actually a red flag whether you realize it or not. So, the article reads, my daughter's new friend sneaks snacks from our fridge and pantry. Do I tell her parents? So, um, I want to explain some things. Firstly, as a child in a situation where there wasn't food at home, and as an actual foster caregiver, because before I had children and when my son was very young, I actually partnered with my friend and we took care of foster kids, like the severe cases. So, one of the biggest red flags of of, of an abuse situation is when you have the children at your home and they are sneaking food. Um, this is a really big sign that the food in their home there just isn't any, or it's being kept away from them. So don't tell the parents. What you're going to do when you do this is you're going to create a situation that as soon as they get home, they are going to be abused. They're going to be punished in some form or fashion. Your home may be their only safe haven and the only place that they're able to actually get food and be able to get full. So, by you in turn telling the parents and saying, hey, your child just keeps sneaking and getting food and eating and eating and eating everything in the pantry and leaving us with nothing, you're essentially setting that child up to be beaten, locked in a closet, locked in their room, um, screamed at, all sorts of types of abuses. Um, Withheld food even more than what they already were. A tactic my mother would use is she would take all the food and she would, this is the non refrigerated food. She never kept food in the refrigerator. She just wouldn't because she knew if it was in there, we would get it and actually eat. She would actually take her food with her to work, take all the food with her to work, and leave us with nothing. They would literally be just a bag of sugar and maybe a loaf of bread, and that was it. And that was what my brother and I would end up eating on when we weren't in school. Um, the only time we got to really eat was maybe on a Sunday when whichever stepdad she was with at the time uh, was home and wasn't working, and then she would make a big meal. But they would be fed first, and we wouldn't be able to eat until they were done eating. Um, and then if we ate, most of the times we weren't allowed to get seconds. And to be honest, my mother hardly ate. She just was more interested in alcohol, and she didn't care what was going on or what her boyfriends or our stepdads were doing to us, as long as she got her drugs and alcohol. Um, the majority of the time, what would end up happening, and so that this is clear understanding, when I was 3 years old, um, my mom and dad got divorced. They permanently got divorced. They did remarry once and had my brother, but they permanently got divorced. My mother was more interested in partying and sleeping with everybody, getting high and drunk, than actually taking care of us as children. When my mom and dad were married and we did live with them, I literally ran around the streets with my white dog at 2 and 3 years old on my own without any adult supervision. Um, we were lucky because we were kind of in the boonies and right down from my grandmother's and pretty much related to everyone. So I would end up at like, I think they were at my third or fourth cousin's house that was kind of cockeyed down the street from us, and I would end up at their house and they would feed me. And they would call my grandmother, who then would have my uncles come and get me and bring me home. And this went on for years from the time I was little. When I was a baby, my mom wouldn't change my diapers. She wouldn't take care of me. It was literally my uncles would have to help, And then my aunt, great aunts, would have to be coming in to check on them. And my grandmother was constantly called to come and get me because my mother was not. She was drunk and passed out on the fucking couch. The house is so dirty that you couldn't walk through it. And my dad, he loved my mom very much. He did get to the point where he started drinking. It became an issue, and he was never home because of the stuff with my mom. They did divorce, and then they decided to get back together. Then had my brother, and it all just repeated itself, except for some reason, after my mother had my brother, she she actually took care of him. They didn't really have to step in much with him. She actually changed the diapers and fed him and take care of him, and they never had to worry. But I was never taken care of. I was completely ignored. I just did everything on my own. I had my white dog. We just ran the road and always ended up across the street or at my mama's. You know, everybody else. It was always everybody else taking care of me. Um, After the final last divorce, I was about 3. My mom pulls up at my grandmother's house, which is in a different state, opens the door, pulls all of her stuff out, sits us on the little sidewalk that walks up to the house, and my grandparents came out. She stood there and told my grandmother, "I can't do this anymore." Got in her car, and when I started crying and ran to the door to ask her where she was going, she told me she was going to get cigarettes. And she left and didn't come back till I was much older. It was years before we saw her again. We later found out that she had met some guy and married him and ran off to Myrtle Beach. Um, she would call, but she was never calling to talk to us. She never wanted to call and talk to us. She was calling to get my grandmother to wire money to her and to guilt them. And she would call drunk and high and be abusive towards them. And my grandparents had us till I was about 9 or 10 years old, I think. I might have been 11. I'm not sure. It's all kind of hazy because it was such a traumatic and a bunch of craziness that went on. I know that I was in 4th grade at the time. Yeah, so I'd be about 9. 9. Yeah, 9 years old. Um, my brother had just started kindergarten. Uh, we ended up the family had a big meeting because most of the family, when my grandmother passed away, so most of the family didn't want my mother to take us because they knew how she was. They didn't feel that it was safe and that she would even be able to take care of us, which was the truth. All of this was the truth. My one uncle and aunt absolutely tried to get my mother to sign custody over to them. Just her custody, not my father's custody. My father was there. My father was in agreement that because of the work he was doing and him not being home all the time, that he could take us, but we would be spending the majority of the time with his mother, that grandmother, which we probably would have been a lot better off than what ended up happening. If my uncle and aunt had actually been able to get mom to sign custody over and let us live with them, we would have been in a much better, had a much better life, and most of the things that's happened wouldn't have happened. So either one of those situations would have been extremely better than what happened. My mother cried and begged and pleaded to get custody and get us back. So she did. So her boyfriend, we had, before my grandmother had passed, my grandmother and grandfather had to let her had like weekends with us and visitation with us, with the stipulation that they couldn't be drinking or on drugs or partying during it or any unsafe activity, which, it's reasonable to expect. So, my mother's boyfriend at the time completely kissed ass to the point that my grandparents trusted my mother. And during the time that we actually stayed with them, he had been very sexually explicit to the point where he would play porn with us blatantly able to watch it, like in the living room in front of everyone. And my mother just acted like nothing was going on. He would be just inappropriately hugging and touching in a manner that absolutely made me uncomfortable. I had told my grandmother this before she had passed away, and yet my mom played it out like I was just making it up. And let me express that my mother is so good at convincing people and lying that she believes her own lies, and she can pretty much manipulate people into thinking what she wants them to think without even really trying. So we have this whole situation, and the rest of the family were completely unaware that this boyfriend of my mother's had his custodial rights taken away from him for extreme abuse and sexual abuse of his own children. He had taken his kids when they were infants and put them in a scalding hot bathtub and forced them to sit in it to the point that they nearly had third degree burns when the mother walked in. The mother had caught him sexually abusing both the daughter and the son. He had sexually abused all his nieces and nephews and his other children with his other marriages, and that was the reason why his wives had divorced him. Um, you need to understand too, laws were a lot different then than they are now, and they pretty much let them get away with it. He's been getting away with it all his life. He's not even allowed to be around his grandchildren. He is so abusive. Um, he abused one of his nieces so badly that she tried to commit suicide, and she and I are the same age. We were 13 years old, and she tried to kill herself. Um, I mean, it's severe. He is a serial sexual abuser and physical and mental abuser. My mother brought us into this household. We didn't even have our own room. We had bunk beds. She allowed him to come in the bathroom on us and fling the curtain open and touch us. She allowed him to play porn in the living room and never said anything to him. She allowed him to sneak into our bedrooms at night and attempt to rape us. She allowed him to lock us in the attic with no air conditioner and no ventilation in the middle of summer. She allowed him to force us to take and pull out every tiny pebble out of this huge garden in our front yard in the middle of summer all day without water or being allowed to go to the bathroom. And to put it lightly, we were so scared of him that we refused to go downstairs to go to the bathroom, and we would sneak containers into our rooms and use the bathroom in those containers and then sneak them out early in the morning before anybody got up because we were so scared to go to the bathroom. He forced us to do things with each other. He pulled guns on us to if we protested to do anything. He kept vicious dogs and kept us in fear, and this entire time my mother acted like there wasn't anything wrong, that this was all normal. As long as she was getting her alcohol and getting what she wanted, she absolutely didn't care. He would have her cook things that we were severely allergic to and then have her sit on us and force feed us this food. And then he would sit and time how long it would take us to have reactions to this food. And then he would allow her to take us to the emergency room. In the course of the time that we lived with her, we were rushed to the emergency room numerous times with allergic reactions to food. And she would let the doctors know that she just didn't know it had something in it that we were allergic to. We were not allowed to do anything. We were not allowed to have friends over. We were not allowed to just be children. We couldn't have or anything that the other kids had. We were forced to wear extremely plain, ugly clothes. We weren't allowed to have trapper keepers or anything that had any kind of pattern or color to it in school. We were not allowed to tell anybody what was going on at home, or when we got home, we would get the hell beat out of us. We were not allowed to go on to our family about any of it, or we got the hell beat out of us. We were at mercy of my this monster. And if you've ever met me and talked to me or met me on Twitch and or watched me for any of the time, I am a very strong-willed person. I'm always going to fight. You're not going to be able to get that over on me. I'm not going to let you have the upper hand. And I didn't care that I was getting the hell beat out of me. I didn't care that I would get more abused. I never stopped fighting him. Never stopped fighting him. I made my mother's life miserable. She absolutely hated me because I wouldn't just give in to what he wanted. And she was just as verbally abusive and physically abusive as he was. And honestly, it got to a point where he went nuts because I wouldn't do what he wanted, and he started breaking everything. And my mother did leave him at that point. But when he left, there was no food in the house anymore, and mom refused to feed us. The only time we ate and actually got to eat good was at school and when we would stay with my aunt and my uncle. So those times were the times that I was the happiest because I would get to eat. But we still weren't allowed to tell our family what was going on, or we would get the hell beat out of us. Um, my mom never had food in the house. Never. Unless she had company and she was trying to show off, then she'd have food in the house. She had a friend that would come around sometimes, and she quickly figured out what was really going on in the house. And she stayed friends with mom and around because she was sneaking us stuff. And she convinced my mom to let us go with her and her parents to do stuff. And her and her parents tried to fight mom and get her to hand over custody to them so that we could be safe. But my mom wouldn't do it. We were our mother's pawns. She would take us to the bars to pick men up, have me sit down on strange men's laps, wearing these god awful dresses and outfits, and have my hair all fixed up. Just so they'll buy her drinks or drugs or whatever. And, like, she finally found this guy that she started dating. Now, he was divorced. He had a son. And the reason why his wife and his son, why his wife divorced him and she left was because of his drinking and abuse, because he was beating her constantly. And he was not really allowed to see his children because of this abuse. But as his son got older, and then she found out that he was, with my mother, she thought it would be safe. It was not safe. I'm just going to tell you now. That man was horrifically violent, abusive monster, even when he was sober. He had something in him that was just so nastily evil. Just nastily evil. I watched him bust fucking beer bottles on my mother's head. He pulled guns out on us constantly. Threw my mother to the floor and drug her around, slamming her head into the walls and shit. He was actually my last straw. When my mother got with him and we moved into like a subdivision, my friends, a lot of my friends, well, one friend of mine, his mother was a cafeteria worker, and then another friend of mine's mother was a teacher. And so mom was a little bit more cautious about how she acted and treated us with that because they lived down the street and they were always over. But if it wasn't for them, I don't know if I would be here, to be honest. I don't. My friend, whose mother was a cafeteria worker, made sure we had food and sent us home every day with food when school was in, and would have her daughter bring food down to us when it wasn't. And my other friend, his mother, who's a school teacher, caught the signs of abuse and would storm in the house and make my mother accountable for there not being food in the house and not having clothes and stuff that we needed. And ultimately, ended up calling the state on my mother and got me